All right, Will Manso, Clay Ferraro. This is a Miami Sports Pod playoff edition as we've got the Heat now entering a second round, Clay, and the Panthers beginning their first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, hosting the Capitals. How's this for a week for us? We've got Monday, Heat game, Tuesday, Panthers game, Wednesday, Heat game, Thursday, Panthers game, Friday, Heat game, Saturday, Panthers game, Sunday. I mean, we're going right down the list. We got F1 in the middle of all that, too, at the end of the week. Let's start with the Heat, though. They pretty much took care of business as we expected against Atlanta, but a lot is going to be different against the Sixers series, not expected. Let's start with the obvious. Joel Embiid is out for at least games 1 to 2. How does that change your perspective on this series, on what we can expect between the Heat and the Sixers?
Well, it's enormous. I mean, the best player in the series, one of the best players in the NBA, is out for at least the first 2 games. So, I mean, there's no way to, make this seem minimal. It's enormous. And yet we already saw that Philadelphia can beat Miami without both Joel Embiid and James Harden, because they already did. So I think part of that, you can say, okay, well, maybe that gives Philadelphia some confidence and all that. And yet I do think that there's a world where the Heat's antenna are up a little bit more because of what happened in their last game against Philly with James Harden and Joel Embiid out. Mm-hmm. They have to contain Tyrese Maxey, and they're going to have to do that whether Joel Embiid is out there or not. I really think he's the X factor. We'll talk more about him. And the Heat have injury issues of their own. We think that Jimmy Butler will be back for game 1. He's been cleared. We assume that Tyler Herro will be able to play.
Yeah,
but
those
Kyle
guys
Lowry is out, and we don't know when he'll be back. So both teams have some issues, but certainly it's fair to say that the best player in the series being out for at least the first 2 games is the biggest of them all.
Yeah, you can't minimize it. You can't downplay it. You can't say it's not that significant. You can't say it's not going to change the course of the series. I mean, it does all that and the above. I think the thing that, to me, while it doesn't change the final result, I thought the Heat were going to win this series, and we'll obviously get to our predictions later. It does change the way they could go about and the way they do things. Look, not having to face Joel Embiid, we've seen the way they throw multiple bodies on Embiid when they play him in the past, is enormous. I mean, there's just no way. The Heat are best when they can attack one guy. They've had success in the past with Milwaukee because they can know how to attack Giannis. They've had success with other teams because they know how to attack that one guy. With Joel Embiid, he's such a unique player that, you try to slow him down, you try to do different things. It could give opportunities potentially for James Harden to finally come to life, which is something that we haven't seen very much since he's come over to Philadelphia. But now without that, Clay, you get a series where realistically the Heat should be able to handle the Sixers. I mean, they should be able to handle the Sixers at home especially, and they should be able to handle them with Jimmy Butler, with, Bam Adebayo, with Tyler Herro having a better series. I want to get to Tyler in a minute, but how about Victor Oladipo, and what is happening there? The way he's gone from X factor to key factor potentially in this series. How do you see his role shaping up? Knowing, again, Lowry doesn't play in game 1 at least, you would think Spo is going to go back to what he did in that Atlanta series when Lowry was out and they say, hey, Vic, it's your turn. You get the call in that last game. And we saw what he did. I mean, he totally turned that game around when the Heat were not playing well on offense early on, and he still has the defensive angle, which we know he can be so good defensively.
Well, let me ask you this. You think they'll go with the lineup that they went with typically when Lowry was out, which is Gabe Vincent starting, but Oladipo just gets more minutes as the game goes on because he proved in that game that he could. So it's like, or do you think that maybe they put Oladipo in the starting lineup?
I see. Here's the thing. Remember,
and we're recording this on Sunday night, by the way, so this question may be answered by the time.
And it's okay, because in the end, you and I have had this discussion many times. I think anybody who hears us talk Heat before is that who starts doesn't matter. It's who finishes and who gets the most minutes. It's the same reason we talk about Tyler Herro so much about the time he gets, that it doesn't really matter. But I think in this case, in this series, we saw Oladipo play for Jimmy Butler in that last game, and he started for Jimmy. Jimmy was out. Jimmy, as you mentioned earlier, he's going to play Monday, barring something crazy happening. He's going to start. To me, though, I think you could double up with Jimmy and Victor. Now, Spo being a creature of habit, Spo showing his cards in the past, yeah, he probably goes with Gabe. But I think Victor's going to have significant minutes in this series. I don't think this is a case where, and I'm curious what you think, because there are people that think that Victor and Jimmy can't play together, that their games are too similar. They're both guys that are not necessarily shooters. They're both guys that are excellent two-way players that like to attack the basket. How do you make that work together in a lineup? I mean, if there's anybody who can do it, it's Eric Spoelstra. And I think for the Heat to have success moving forward, they have to make it work, Clay, because I think Oladipo's earned a role. I think he's earned minutes regardless of when Kyle comes back, regardless of anyone else getting hurt.
So first, let's throw the word "can't" out the window because it's silly. Say that they can't play together is absurd. What I think the fairest way to put this is that if Victor Oladipo and Jimmy Butler are on the floor together, and Jimmy Butler is having a B or better Jimmy Butler game, you're not going to see Victor Oladipo do offensively what he did in Game 5 against Atlanta because he's just not going to have the level of opportunity that he had in that game. And I think the thing with Vic, as we've seen in the past, is he's at his best when it comes to scoring, when he can kind of feel the game. You give him a couple of shots early, maybe they go, maybe they don't, but like he gets into the flow of the game and he starts to see the ball go in the basket. And you can say that for a lot of great scorers. But I think in particular, the Victor Oladipo that we saw in Game 4 of that Heat-Hawks series, where he went out there and he was able to impact the game without putting the ball in the basket consistently. That's the Victor Oladipo that can absolutely be effective with Jimmy Butler on the floor, regardless of if he has the ball in his hands a lot, because he was out there skying for rebounds. He was the energizer out there in many ways when they really needed him to be, and he was facilitating. You saw him a lot driving to the basket and then kicking out, almost to a fault a couple of times, where he could have finished, but instead he was looking to find his teammates. So that Victor Oladipo, that plays with anybody. That plays with Jimmy Butler. And in fact, it could actually get Jimmy Butler the ball in spots where he's even more comfortable. So I think it's not that they can't play together. That goes out the window. I don't think you see a Victor Oladipo 20-plus point performance with Jimmy Butler also having a 20-plus point performance because they are similar when it comes to their scoring. But I think there's a way that he can be very, very effective and help the team in other ways. As far as the starting lineup goes, my guess is they probably start with Gabe Vincent out there for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think because they're comfortable with that unit. We know how much Spo likes his rotations. But number two, I think they want to see, at least early on, how does that lineup work against Tyrese Maxey and James Harden? And
Don't you think Oladipo would be better for that then? Don't you think Jimmy and Oladipo would be better on Harden and Maxey? And then you have, by the way, you have Bam as the flex there because Bam normally would have to be attacking Embiid among others. Now all of a sudden you don't have Embiid for at least the first two games. It does change the way, I don't want to say the chances that he could take, but certainly the way they can match up guys changes. And Gabe is excellent defensively, but I'm not sure if Oladipo wouldn't be better on Maxey and then Butler on Harden, or vice versa from the start. Spo's been known to throw stuff and sticks, and give it a shot. I'm not saying he's doing that Monday, but I will say this. I think the option is there to kind of have a defensive-minded package right off the bat. Sure. And again, who starts isn't that significant because those minutes can be flexed around. Once it starts, if it doesn't necessarily go well, and I think that's a lot of what Oladipo, I'll be honest with you, when Oladipo started the other day in place of Jimmy, I don't think it was a no-brainer it was going to happen, even though it seemed like an easy fix, because I know Eric Spoelstra would easily pull the plug. If Oladipo would have gone out there the other night in that Game 5 against the Hawks and started, 0 of 4, and it doesn't seem comfortable, Spo pulls that plug and goes to plan B, whatever that may be, Caleb Martin, whatever it would have been. So I think you could take some chances, given you don't have Embiid, to see how it goes. And you can always get out of it quickly midway through the first quarter if you don't like the way it's looking.
Yeah, I think it's between the two, and you and I are in at practice, and we don't have the analytics in front of us that the Heat do, and we don't. But I think it's the player who you're more comfortable with in isolation defense. So if the Sixers have the ball, and we know James Harden, he loves playing iso ball, and obviously they're doing more of a team element there in Philly. But if Philly is going to try to hunt matchups, who are you more comfortable getting ISO'd on James Harden? Who are you more comfortable getting ISO'd on Tyrese Maxey? Because they're very, very different players, right? With James Harden, he's crafty. He does have the quick first step, and yet I think he's similar to Trae Young in many ways, where it's not his like lightning speed or athleticism that gets you. He's just super crafty, super smart. He has that veteran savvy about him, and he knows how to draw fouls, things like that. With Tyrese Maxey, man, he has gone in a flash. He's explosive. Yeah. He's athletic. He's going to get to the cup, and he's also going to get inside and find his teammates. So which player are you more comfortable can both deal with James Harden's craftiness, but also can deal with Tyrese Maxey's athleticism and explosiveness?
Yeah,
And if that player is
Maxey's an
Oladipo,
interesting
maybe he is.
topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maxey's an interesting topic because I think, most people are going to turn to Harden and say, well, James Harden needs to be James Harden, right? But we haven't seen James Harden in a long time. We haven't seen that kind of player. And knowing you won't see Embiid at least till game 3, if there's any chance for Philly to really stay in this series and have any kind of chance to prolong it past 5-6 games, they need Tyrese Maxey to be the guy that you showed those glimpses throughout the season. He certainly showed at the Toronto series. I just feel like the Heat have enough weapons. Again, we haven't even mentioned Caleb Barton. I referenced his name, but how he works in the rotation. I think the pieces, it goes back to the thought of Joel Embiid. The Heat missing Kyle Lowry is significant for them. Look, you miss Kyle Lowry. They did without it against Atlanta. You don't want to go very long without Kyle Lowry. He's their floor leader. The Sixers losing Joel Embiid turns them into a mediocre team. You think the Sixers without Joel Embiid are borderline fringe playoff team at best. The Heat without Kyle Lowry, with all the pieces we've seen, especially the way Victor's been playing, is still a good team. Maybe not a championship team, but still a good team. And I think that's the significant thing in the way they do things. I think, I referenced Tyler Herro earlier. The amazing part about the series win against Atlanta is that Tyler Herro did not have a good series. He was okay in game 5. I think he ended up with 16, 17 points. But I was wrong. I thought going into the series, Tyler was going to be the leading scorer of that series. I thought he was going to have 25, 30 a game. I thought he was ready for that next step, which, by the way, I still think he is. For whatever reason, and I don't think it was an Atlanta defensive thing. I mean, he obviously got attention as he always does. But, Clay, when you see the way he played, missed a lot of shots that he would normally hit. The floaters, the step back threes, things that we've seen him hit a lot of, he was just missing them. I think this is a chance for Tyler to get right in this series. With so much of the ability now to move guys around, that Tyler can get comfortable and get back to the Tyler we saw the last 2 months of the season as a sixth man of the year and the leading scorer on this team. Because to me, Tyler's still the key for the Heat to make a deep run in these playoffs.
I was talking with Ira Winderman of the Sun Sentinel about this, and he said he's trying to figure out if there's an injury here. Like that's and the thing, people who know the Miami Heat,
I haven't heard that, by the way. I haven't heard anything about that.
They don't let anything out. They're never going to let anybody know anything. They keep everything in house as much as they can. His feeling was something doesn't look right with Tyler, and they won't say what it is. We do know that he's fought the knee a bit this season. He's been in and out of the lineup at times. So, is there some inflammation there? Is there? And here's the other thing. Like, if he's definitely going to play, if the Heat are 100% sure that he's going to play, they're not going to list him on the injury report with anything. So whatever it is, it's something that isn't structural, but it's something that, if there is something, it's something that is doing enough to where it's causing him to not be the Tyler Herro that we're used to seeing. That's assuming there is something there. But Will, my thing with him is, even with that, the more he goes out there and gets reps, he's going to learn to play with it. And I feel like whatever it is, if there is something going on with the knee or whatever it might be, he's going to be the Tyler Herro that we're and until this season is over and he hasn't shown that ability, I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. At some point, Tyler Herro is going to go out there and be the Tyler Herro that we've seen throughout this season, that we've seen in big moments. I'm expecting it to happen in game 1 of this series. And I think they need him. And I think you're right, by the way, going back to the Heat being a better team. It's clearly the better team. They would have been the better team even with Embiid out there. The danger is take care of business at home. Win these 2 games at home, because if there's a world where Embiid does come back in game 3, you don't want them to have this sense of confidence where they go back to their gym. It's a 1-1 series. They get back their MVP. And all of a sudden you're putting yourself in danger of losing 1 or 2. Or look what happened to Philly in game 6 in Toronto. Don't let this series extend any longer than it has to. That's not being disrespectful towards the 76ers. Don't give them hope that they can win this series. Don't give them hope that they can extend this series any further than it needs to be because then you put yourself at risk for even more injuries and hurting yourself down the road.
Yeah, and I think, look, let's finish this thought on Tyler. I don't think Tyler Herro's hurt. I don't think that's what it is at all. I mean, I think he's probably got wear and tear like anybody on this team, because you look at the injury report, he'd have about 6 players that are hurt. I mean, 6 guys that are, a handful of guys that are banged up, a sore knee, sore this, sore that. I mean, that's the part of a long season. Tyler may be a little sore in areas, but I don't think Tyler's hurt. I think Tyler just had just an off series. And I think it's okay for a 22-year-old to have an off series after having a great season all year long and going into this first round of the playoffs against Atlanta. And I think he just struggled. And I think he'll, as you said, though, I think he'll have a big game 1. I think he'll bounce back. I think he's still a focal point of what this team needs to do to have success in this series and beyond. I don't think Tyler Herro's hurt, and I think he's going to have a big series. So I'm going to double down on that. I said that he's going to have a big series with the Hawks. I was wrong. Absolutely wrong. I think he's going to have a big series against the Sixers. I think, as you mentioned, I think you're going to see the Tyler Herro that we saw throughout the year. I think he's allowed one bad series, a couple of bad. And by the way, I say bad. Like I said, I think he's had like 16, 17 points in game 5. It's not like he was terrible. He just missed some shots that I think we know Tyler normally hits.
And let me make one point as we're closing this out in relative to Herro. Philadelphia's bench is awful. And that is the biggest gap between these two teams with any, when you're going through the matchups of defense, offense, outside shooting, whatever, the biggest gap between these two teams, and it's not even close, is their depth. And so Tyler Herro, if there's going to be a series where he's going to step up and make his presence felt, it's going to be in this series where you're going up against a Philly team that, by the way, was already thin depth-wise before they traded Seth Curry and Andre Drummond for James Harden.
And think about what you've got from the Heat perspective. You want to talk about depth, and that's something we saw already in the Boston-Milwaukee series. Boston's a really good team. They got a great defense and an excellent starting 5. They don't have much depth. And I think when you look at the Heat, when Kyle gets back, presumably in this series he'll get back, maybe game 2, you shift Gabe right back to the bench, if you don't already in game 1, but you got Gabe coming off the bench. You got Duncan coming off the bench. You got Tyler coming off the bench. You got conceivably Victor Oladipo coming off the bench. I mean, that right there could essentially be 4/5 of a starting lineup. I mean, you throw Dwayne Dedmon in there. That's not a bad team. That's not a bad starting 5. Just the guys I just mentioned right there.
The Heat have 6 guys off the bench who at any
Caleb
point,
Martin's another one.
Yeah, any point in the series, they can turn the series by making a couple of plays in the Heat's favor. And hey, Duncan Robinson could go out there and hit 8 3-pointers again.
We saw it in game 1. So somebody said to me, like, "Oh, Duncan shouldn't play. He's terrible because he only had a couple threes, in the game 4 and 5, whatever." I said, "Did you see what he did in game 1?" And we talked about it, and it was in the preview of the series for Atlanta and the preview of the playoffs. You and I have talked. There just aren't guys like Duncan. There aren't teams that have guys like Duncan that can just throw out a guy that can get 8 threes. It just doesn't exist. The closest thing, I guess, would be the Warriors now, the way Jordan Poole's developed, and with Steph Curry having been out and Poole developed in this, you've seen this young guy come up and he could be a 6th man who gets you 30 points as he's done. But not many teams have that luxury. And the Heat do, not just with Duncan, but again with Victor and Gabe and Tyler, and you go down the list. That's the key to this series to me, is that the Heat's depth, no matter how many games Embiid plays or not, is just too much. So let's get to the series prediction. Let's keep it simple, Clay. I'm going to start it off. I know the old joke, the Heat in 5. Well, I say Heat in 5. I think Heat in 5 because I was leaning toward Heat in 5 even with Embiid, but I was probably going to go Heat in 6 with Embiid. Say, okay, they'll steal another game. We saw the Hawks grab one. The Heat just melted down to the stretch, and Trey had the one game where he hit a few shots late. But to me, the Heat just have, as we just mentioned, just too many weapons and available options. And I think more importantly than that, Clay, they have the defense. And, they're going to be nights, and we saw it in the Atlanta series, even a 5-game series win, where the Heat didn't particularly play well on offense in some of those games. Then when you look up at the scoreboard, the other team's got 75, 80 points midway through the fourth quarter, and that's the way the Heat win games. And if the offense at any point starts clicking, which will be partly Tyler Herro getting back to what he could be. Oh, by the way, we have a reference Bam out of bio. Bam wasn't, everybody has that conversation about Bam's aggression and what he needs to do. And Eric Spoelstra says, let Bam just be Bam. He's absolutely right. But there's going to be a game in this series where Bam's going to be Bam and then some, where it's not just going to be 18.10 rebound Bam. It's going to be 26.13 rebound Bam. He has those games now and then. I think we'll have one in this series. I just think there's just too much. This is just a better basketball team without Joel Embiid. I don't care. To me, it's Heat in 5.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, I do think The concern is if you give Philly some sort of hope. And the one thing that I think we've seen with this Philly team is they're uneven. And, we saw that in the Toronto series. And you don't want to give them reasons to feel really good about themselves. Now, if you start going the other way, it can go downhill really quickly, I think, with that team. And so take care of business at home.
Heat and what?
No, I'm with you. Heat and 5. I'm with
you.
I'm sticking with the same prediction. But look, if they win the first 2 games, I could see this thing being a sweep. If they split at home, I could see this thing easily going 6, if not 7. And that's just where, if you give Philly some sort of life, and then Embiid comes back in game 3, then all of a sudden this thing gets a little bit dicey. And so I'm going 5, but it's almost like down the middle where I could easily see it going 4. But if they lose,
I don't think it'll be a sweep. The Heat are prone, and they've done it all year, even as the best team in the East and one of the best teams in the league. They have those moments where just offensively, they just terrible down the stretch and they collapse and have bad moments. I think you can kind of, unfortunately, especially against a quality team. I mean, Philly's not a bad team. Obviously, without Embiid, they're different, but they're not an awful team. I think against a team like Philly, especially if Embiid does get back for game 3 and 4, there will be a moment where the Heat just don't play well. We've seen it too much, and they need to build. If they're going to win the championship this year, and they're really going to get out west and beat a Phoenix or whoever comes out of West, Golden State, whoever it may be, they need to really clean that up in those moments. One game a series, it rears its ugly head, those meltdowns. And unfortunately, against better teams, if they get to the next round, it's a Boston, Milwaukee, and if they get to the finals of Phoenix, Golden State, as I mentioned, Memphis, whoever it may be, you start getting into where those teams really make you pay. And I don't think the Sixers will make the Heat pay. So you say 5. I think Heat and 5 as well. So that is getting started Monday night. Now, we started the podcast talking about, hey, every day this week we got a playoffs, which means we get to the Panthers making their way onto the podcast. Clay, the Panthers are won the President's Trophy. They won the best team in the NHL, most points in the NHL, best home team in the NHL. They open up at home in Sunrise. Home ice throughout now for the Panthers. But first things first, I think when we talk about the Panthers, and history will have nothing to do with what happens in this series, but you at the same time can't escape the history of the fact that the Florida Panthers have only won a series in one season, and that was the year of the Rat. After that, they've made the playoffs a handful of times, just a few, and always losing that first round. Is this the year? And you would think it is. They're going to take that step. They're going to take care of business against the Capitals. I can't see how they wouldn't, given how we talk about the Heat's depth, especially with potentially Aaron Ekblad coming back. Andrew Burnett saying that he could be back as soon as game 1. This team is just better than the Capitals and should be better than most teams they've faced throughout the playoffs.
It's funny. This is shaping up kind of like what the Heat's road could look like a bit. In the Panthers side, the Eastern Conference is a gauntlet, but Washington isn't. And the thing about Washington, look, they're talented. Their issue is their goaltending is really bad. And when you got to roll out 2 goaltenders, you don't have one. And so what I expect in this series, I'm going to pick Panthers in 5. And what I actually think would be best case scenario for this team, I think the Panthers may need one game where they do their typical slow start thing, and then they don't come back. And they have to figure out, because it hits them in the face, okay, we can't do that again. But I think they're good enough that it won't matter, and they're going to win the other 4 games in this series with no problem whatsoever. They're going to get that wake-up call at some point that this is the playoffs, and it's going to be a perfect opportunity for them to kind of get that taste of playoff hockey and then change who they are and stop these slow starts that have plagued them all year long.
And I think that's the key, right?
Better teams in the playoffs.
No, and I think that's look. If there's anything with the Panthers, the key would be get off to better starts. Don't put so much pressure on your offense. And the Panthers have one of the best in the league. They can score unlike anyone in the league. And when you look at the step they took this year, we already knew they had Sasha Barkov as their star. But here's the thing. Now they have star 1A, 1B. I mean, Jonathan Huberdeau is a superstar. And Huberdeau to me was one of the better 25, 30 players in the league entering the season. I think he was a very good player, a very good second piece of the team with a star like Barkov to build around. The thing is now Jonathan Huberdeau is a star in his own right. I mean, so you got 2 stars, but to your point on the Capitals, while they have all kinds of goalie issues, I still worry about the Panthers goalie and Sergei Bobrovsky and how consistent he can be, and Spencer Knight, if he can handle this when his number is called at some point in this postseason. Because the reality is this for the Panthers, as you just said, they could probably get away with that now in a series against the Capitals, a team that's just not very good. But when you look at the rest of the Eastern Conference, the teams that are better, and obviously everyone's going to talk about Tampa and other teams, that's the first team that comes to mind. Obviously, the Panthers would have to get through. But you cannot spot good teams like that in the playoffs, especially as we know when playoff hockey, when goalies get hot, they start playing well, 2, 3, 4 goals. Forget 4 goals. That was some craziness in the regular season. I mean, just 2 goals. You spot a good team, 2 goals in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and you're asking for trouble. You're asking to be eliminated early in the playoffs. And I think that's the key for the Panthers. And I don't know what Andrew Burnett could do with his team. Obviously, look, a lot of that had to do with the fact that, Sasha Barkov talked about it today. It was one of those things where, we've been through this long season. We've been so good throughout the year. We've been really waiting for this moment. I could see how complacency and just, the grind of the season almost was, it wasn't like it was a challenge, like, hey, let's fall behind 3-0 and see if we can come back. But I could see how in moments of a long season when you're playing well and you're one of the best teams in the East all year long and you're rolling at home, those little moments could creep up. That can't creep up in the playoffs. It just cannot. And getting Aaron Ekblad back obviously will help. If he's anywhere close to the player we know he could be. If Bob can just be consistent and get started, playing consistent in net, I think there's no reason that not only they'll beat the Capitals, but again, that this is the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. I know there's this whole drama, the curse of the President's Trophy and all this stuff, and, the team that finishes the best record. I think the Panthers can make the jump. Clay, the only thing is, what do you think of the whole theory of you got to earn it in the playoffs, you got to learn in the playoffs, and maybe this is a team, because they haven't had that opportunity, has got to stumble before they have success, meaning that you may win that first round, but to expect this team to make a Stanley Cup run to the Stanley Cup finals without having won a series with this core is asking a lot.
Yeah, I think you win the first series and that goes out the window. And that's why I feel like it shapes up similarly to the Heat's playoff road, in that you can afford, and they wouldn't want to take this and have it enter into their minds, but you can afford to be a little bit slow against Washington. You can afford to have a bad game. You can afford to fall behind in one game and maybe even lose one game.
Not 2-3 goals though. Just 1 goal.
Well, I'm just saying, if you lose a game against them,
general,
you're going to be fine. You're not going to lose the series against Washington. I'm very confident in saying you're not going to lose this series against Washington.
I agree with you.
Take your playoff lumps against Washington. Figure out your mistakes against Washington and get through it, because by the time all the stuff about, they haven't won a playoff series, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. Guess what? By the time you're in the second round, you haven't won a playoff series since 2 days ago.
Yeah, you won a playoff series. That's it.
Out the window, because this group will have already won a playoff series. So, no, I don't care about any of that, because, number one, I don't see them losing to Washington. So, number two, none of that's going to matter, because they will have already won a playoff series.
So how do the Panthers, the way they win is simple, right? Just keep doing what you're doing, attacking and scoring. Again, we mentioned Huberdeau, Sasha Barkov, Duclair. You go down the list of players that have performed for them, and it's so many of them that have played well. They made the right additions at the deadline. They seem to have everything in place. Clay, I don't think I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I don't think I'm going crazy. I really think this is a team that can make a Stanley Cup Finals run. And that's why I most years, right, that the Panthers have made the playoffs, and it hasn't been many of the Panthers make the playoffs, you say to yourself, I think maybe they have enough to win a series. I really do. And last year, they played well to at least make it a series. And they again, I mentioned Tampa, trying to get through that hurdle of getting through Tampa. But I feel like this team is skipped that step because of the additions they've made and because of the stars and the development of their players, that they've skipped that step. I don't think it's crazy to think. I don't think it's absurd to think. And I don't think it's wrong to think that the Florida Panthers are going to go out of the East and going to win this and going to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't know if I'm going to predict that right now, because right now we're talking strictly about this first round series. So I'll keep it at that. I think it's Panthers in 5. I think the Panthers win this series. I think, as you said, they'll have a slip up. There'll be a slip up somewhere. And just because, again, Alexander Ovechkin, it's playoff hockey, things will happen, and it's okay. I hope it's not a series where they keep falling behind and they having to keep come back, because, again, you don't want to get into that habit as the other series go. But I think this is a team that is ready for this challenge. I bought in for the Panthers about mid-season. And when they made the additions, and credit to their staff and credit to – by the way, I hate the fact that we got to keep calling Andrew Burnett the interim head coach.
Yeah, I thought
the only thing I hate about this Panthers season is the fact that at no point was that interim tag lifted. What more does the man have to do? You go through the Joe Quenneville drama at the beginning of the year, and they do not miss a beat.
Yeah.
Take the interim tag off of them, please. I know there's been the rumors of them going out to get a big name in the offseason, and if they falter, especially that's the direction you go, take the interim tag off this man. It's probably too late now. They're not going to do it before the start of the playoffs. I think it's ridiculous they have him already.
Oh, why? And when you think of it, is when you're putting in the graphics, right? When we're getting ready for our sportscast, and you're typing in Andrew Burnett, and in the second line, which is the identifier, the title, you're like,
interim.
Do I really still have to? And by the way,
I don't say interim. I don't
it.
say. Yeah, I don't. I'm glad. I don't say either. I say
doing
Panthers
it.
head coach Andrew Burnett.
So at Local 10, we have already deemed him the Panthers head coach.
He's
We've taken
damn
off
Panthers
the
head
interim tag on
coach.
our graphic system. So yeah, and look, I mean, putting a bow on it, I've got them in 5 as well. I do think there's going to be that one game where they come out slow and they're like, oh crud, we can't do this in the playoffs. We got to learn really fast. And then they will. And it's going to serve them better in the long run. Then they're going to go out there and win the second round series. Then they're going to win the Eastern Conference. Then they're going to go to the Stanley Cup final. I'm saying that right now.
You believe that too?
To it, and I'm going to say it every time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I know this was about this series, and we're going to have so much time if they do make that kind of run to talk about it, not only here on the pod, but on the shows as well. But I think it's set up that way. I stopped buying the whole, it's the same old Panthers and that we're used to this. They're going to be out one and done, or they're not going to make any noise. This team is just different. It starts with their 2 superstars. It goes through their depth. It goes through hopefully their goaltending. Again, that is, if you can knock the Panthers defensively and, those slow starts, and if Bob struggles, yeah, as the playoffs get further, it can be an issue. But as it stands for this series, Clay, you say in 5. I say in 5. We say Heat in 5. All right, so 5's the number. It's the magic number. High five. Panthers and Heat. Onward they go. Onward we go as well. We appreciate you listening and subscribing as well. We'll have a lot more covered throughout the playoffs. By the way, don't forget there's a lot of action on Local 10. NHL Stanley Cup playoffs as well as NBA playoffs, which continued. So hopefully the Heat and the Panthers take us on a fun ride. It's the first time in my 23 years at the station that I enter the playoffs where both the Heat and the Panthers are in the playoffs with the expectation that they're going to be a deep run. I don't ever remember this before. I get last year, the Heat were one and done. The Panthers were one and done, all the pandemic stuff. A few years ago, the Panthers made the playoffs. They had a nice 7-game series. It's never coincided where you feel like both teams are going to go deep into the postseason. And I think I'd be extremely disappointed if both of these teams don't end up in the finals. I mean that. I don't think it's a homer. I believe they're both going. Heat to the NBA Finals, Panthers to the Stanley Cup Finals.
I believe that too, but I thought you were going to make the joke that it's the first time in your time at Local 10 that you've had the Heat in the playoffs, the Panthers in the playoffs, and an F1 race right down the street.
Hey,
I
hear the cars from here. We got all kinds of F1. Don't even get me started on F1 stuff. We got all kinds of F1 stuff coming your way on Local 10. All right, with that, we drink to that. It's going to be a busy week ahead. We'll talk next week. Enjoy the action all week long. The Heat, the Panthers, everyday action coming your way. Great time to be a South Florida sports fan.